Yeah, the gentleman on the left is me. This is a time without gray hair. So we had the first State of AI in August 2017, and I still remember the panel discussion where the question came up, how about the Austrian AI ecosystem? Is there even a non-profit or grassroots movement? We realized there's one in Germany. We heard there's one in the UK. And then we said, there's none in Austria. So we should create one. This was really the birthplace was in this room. As you can see with the picture on the right-hand side, our non-profit also it was very important to have a very diverse setup. So I'm the only non-Tyrolean in the picture on the right-hand side. All the other three co-founders of the non-profit, they're all from Tyrol, even from Wattens. Last but not least, what did we do in recent years? We now have several local chapters. One of them is in Tyrol, Carinthia and Austria. The rest is basically more or less managed via Vienna. We have several working groups. One of them is in the area of deep reinforcement learning. This is like for the 35 startups, for the tech nerds. We run quite large conferences, and we also have lots of collaborations like with the city of Vienna or with local chapters of the Austrian Economic Chamber, Industrial Association, and so on. Last but not least, we are also hosting now since several years a conference series. It's the AAIC, the Applied AI Conference. And it started as I would say, relatively minor-sized event series, 100% non-profit, just to remind you. And thanks to COVID, because of COVID, we were forced to move it online, and this is when it completely exploded from the size. So we now typically attract between 500 and 2,500 participants for the larger events. We have speakers from LinkedIn, from Atomico, and so on. So really all the large corporations are joining. And best of all, I think several of you were in my mentoring sessions, and they had questions, for example, what about AI in agri-tech? Or how about AI in forestry? For most of these, let's say, underserved niche topics, we had special events, and you can see it all on YouTube. It's for free, it doesn't bite. So yeah, last but not least, this is how to get in touch with us. I see, by the way, also the entire evening today is streamed on YouTube. So if you later on want to watch the recording, you can do this on the AAIC Applied AI. This is like our homepage for YouTube. And yeah, without further ado, I would like to hand over the microphone to our host of tonight, Chris from Sifted. So Chris, the stage is yours.
Thanks, Clemens, Victoria. I'm one of the few people who hasn't got any slides, so you just have to really pay attention to what I'm saying. Like they said, my name is Chris. I work for a company called Sifted, sifted.eu. Some of you are nodding, which is a good sign that means we're doing our job well. For those of you who haven't heard about us, we're a publication that span out of the Financial Times, and we cover startups and tech all across Europe. So if you're not yet familiar, have a look at sifted.eu, and that'll be the end of the self-promotion for now. At Sifted, I have one of the most fun jobs imaginable. I call myself head of intelligence. And what that really means is I try to keep an eye on what's going on in terms of themes and trends all across Europe in the tech scene. Most of the time, that means it's very busy because there's an awful lot going on. But it means I think I'm rather well placed to host this discussion tonight, but you'll be the judge of that. We have a really, really interesting session planned today. We've gone a bit optimistic and we want to cram in an awful lot. So hopefully we'll be able to keep to time. So let's see how that goes. We're going to start with a few opening remarks from our panelists. I'm going to introduce them now. So at the end of it, we can just crack on, basically. So on the panel are the ladies and gentlemen sat at the front row here, so they can get onto the stage very easily. So I'll start from left to right. First of all, we've got Hermann Hauser. I suspect doesn't need that much of an introduction, but his formal title that I put on the piece of paper is that he co-founded Amadeus Capital Partners, but of course has done a lot more than that, including ICT, our hosts, and Arm. Then we've got Han Jiao, who's the founder and CEO of Gina AI. There he is, which is a very, very interesting AI startup based in Berlin, and we'll hear a little bit more about it from him shortly. Then we've got Arnold Schmolders, who's joined us from Amsterdam, where he's a professor of AI. and has also been involved in a couple of spinouts, and so also seen the entrepreneurial side of things. And then finally, we've got Natasha Milic-Freyling, who's the founder and CEO of Intact Digital, who's come from the UK to join us. So I'm going to hand over to Herman now for some opening remarks. But before I do that, I'm just going to give a very tiny scene setter as to why we're actually having this panel. So the sort of slug for this is the state of AI, European tech sovereignty. But what is European tech sovereignty, and why should we all care about AI? AI is one of those things that is increasingly commonplace. We sort of interact with it in one way or another daily, whether it's through our devices or the products and services we use. And that's almost a little bit scary because it's become commonplace and accepted. We don't really question anymore whether we're interacting with an algorithm that has been created on the other side of the world and is dictating the product or service that we're using. And that means the public debate and the public discussion has quietened a little bit. There's a lot going on in the news at the moment, and AI maybe is a little bit on the back foot, on the back seat. But it's, of course, going to dominate the future in ways that we can't always quite imagine. Like Clemens was saying, we're now having these discussions all the time about what about AI applications in forestry? That's not something anyone really was, not a discussion anyone's really having a few years ago. And so the strategic importance of this technology is only going to grow. And when we talk about tech sovereignty in Europe, in a lot of governments and capitals across the continent and in Brussels, there is already a little bit of a feeling that we're somewhat of a digital colony. Europe sort of lost the digital consumer race, whatever you want to call it, to the US, and now the big example everyone wants to talk about is TikTok. That shows that, you know, big social apps can come out of China too. And then we have an increasingly fragmenting geopolitical environment with the world sort of carving out into different blocks. And so there is this real worry and fear that Europe could get left behind. And that's sort of what we are going to talk about this evening. So let me hand over to Herman to explain a little bit more about what exactly tech sovereignty is.
Thanks very much, Chris. We're very lucky to have you here because Chris really is somebody who's got probably a better overview of what goes on in Europe in deep tech than anybody. So many of the slides some of you have seen in my keynote when we started the ICT Summer School, but I'll just want to remind you of 2 or 3 slides which are key. And the first one is, what is technology sovereignty and why is it important? Well, the key thing really is this issue about critical technologies that every country needs in order to run their government and run their economy. You know, and these are obvious technologies like computers. If you don't have computers in your society, you're screwed. Or telecommunications. You have to have a telecommunications infrastructure, and 5G, of course, is the latest one. AI and machine learning we will talk about today. That's really the topic of today, but also synthetic biology, DNA sequencing, and blockchain and smart contracts are the sort of my 4 favorite ones, and there are lots of sub-technologies in each of these sectors that we've got to think about. Now, within AI and machine learning, it is really data that has become the bone of contention between countries. That's what Europe is trying to address with GDPR. So we will talk about that, where Europe actually is playing to one of its strengths. The things that we seem to be doing well in Europe is to set standards, because we're actually willing to listen what other people say, as opposed to the Americans and the Chinese. So the 3 questions every nation now has to ask itself is, do we have the technology ourselves? If not, do we have access to it from multiple countries so that not a single country can hold us to ransom? If we can't get it from multiple countries, do we have unfettered, long-term, more than 5 years, guaranteed access from a monopoly or oligopoly from a single country, typically the US and China? And if you get 3 no's, you have to do whatever it takes to get at least one yes. Because if you don't, and the pandemic has sort of shown aspects of this, if you don't, you become so dependent on another country that other country can use this dependency and coerce you to do things that you don't want to do. Good example, of course, is Trump weaponizing some of the US technology to force Europe and the UK in particular to do what he wanted. And the other example, of course, is our dependency on China for manufacturing. I think this is probably, oh yes, this is really my last slide. That I'm writing this book on technology sovereignty for the 8 billion, for the team of 8 billion. And the reason why it's the 8 billion is I think we've got to solve this technology sovereignty problem for everybody, not just for Europe, the US, and China, which are going to be the three technology sovereignty circles. And out of the three, two are hegemons. The US will ask you, are you with us? Are you with us or are you against us? And if you're clever enough to say, we're with you, then they say, that's fantastic. You're with us, and therefore you now will do exactly what I say. And China has the same sort of attitude, just in a different guise, called the Belt and Road Initiative, which of course is a spectacularly successful initiative already, binding many states to the Chinese ecosystem. Europe is the only one of the three that doesn't ask, are you with us or against us? It asks the question, do you share our values? And Europe is also the only area that has achieved a governance layer above the nation state, which sort of works. Now, we bitch about Brussels all the time and the bureaucracy, but the euro is the second most important currency in the world, and we are the largest trading zone in the world. So we get some things right as well. Europe is also the only area that has a proven track record of accepting national differences. We're willing to say, if you share our values, we are willing to make you part of the European story. So I just wanted to have these three slides and to get us started with a discussion. Back over to Chris.
Thanks, Herman. I'm just going to make sure we have the next slides set up for Arnold. Okay, so we're going to click through, and then actually Arnold is going to hop on stage and talk about technology and regulation.
Thank you.
I'm a professor of AI, so let me take you through what I see as trends of late in AI. And for me, it's important not to only emphasize the good of AI, but especially for AI scientists also to bring into their minds the other side of AI. So don't isolate yourself from the world. If you make something, it will always if it's useful and successful, it will also be used in an adverse sense. You have to accept that. The positive things I picked out is some machines are now better than human. For instance, for a diagnosis of breast cancer, you better go to a machine these days. And learning with less is really working. You either structure the network or you make it self-supervised. Large models are coming into play, but unfortunately only I know of some 5 US company owned and some 3 Chinese company owned and 1 owned by the Chinese government, no European. So another sign that we are far too late. And we should really work. This is not a message to you. That's a message because you are on the good side of Europe. But it's a message to Europe. And the interesting trend is we used to focus very much in AI on optimizing one thing, namely the accuracy of things. But now, not only Europe, but also other people ask us to focus on more than accuracy, like robustness, explainability, privacy, and so on. You have to fulfill that, whether you like it or not. You just can't deliver only the best one. And the software suites and hardware you all use these days. You have to accept that for the general public, some systems are too difficult to accept. And deep fakes are, well, this is not exactly a deep fake. They're very good, actually. They're amazingly good. This is not a deep fake, but it is a reality in life, and it will be a political force very soon. And framing, do you know the story about the 200 likes of Facebook? Do you know that paper? All people in the Netherlands should know this paper, really. That from 200 likes, research in Stanford and Oxford, so let's assume it's serious, have reconstructed personal preferences. And after 200 likes, the only one beating the system in indicating personal preferences was the spouse. All other people could not beat it. Colleagues, neighbors, children, no one. So if you have 200 likes, which is approximately a year production, and you have a system which takes that, you can reconstruct personal preference to the same level as the spouse. Are you with me? And that was misused in Cambridge Analytica. Who knows the story of Cambridge Analytica? All of you? Very good. Yeah, that's why politics has become miserable. And accumulation is my biggest worry, that all these data are piling up in the hands of a very few. And that leads to monopolies, like convergence on platforms, on large models, on whatever. But that's nothing to worry about. That has been seen in the world history before, and it will resolve itself either by force of law or by natural evolution. Oh, sorry. There are, I won't discuss this, but there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 current regulations in Europe. If you are in AI and if you run a business, please take note of these. And this one is on personal data. It's mostly symbolic, but it will evolve into something useful. We will talk about it. DGA, the Digital Governance Act, is about sharing data. The Digital Services Act is for large platforms. And for instance, it is based on the assumption that you cannot do recommendation, or you have to leave the option to the user to do recommendation by profiling. You can do other recommendation, but you cannot do it by profiling. And this is very elaborate to put it into law, because if you do it by, you have to argue then, you get endless legal fights about what is profiling. It's not, so, and the same holds for this law, specifically dedicated to AI systems. We get to that in a moment. This one, these two are going to be law. This one also, and this one is under, sorry, these two are under consultation. This is the digital market. That's about monopolies. You have to be fair and open so that SME get more chance to enter. This is digital, the Data Act. This is about who owns actually data and derive the data, very important. All I'm saying is, please continue as hard as you can to work with your SME. Don't care too much about this, but if you have a long-term vision, this will be a force you take into account or you're out in 5 years from now. But for the moment, it doesn't really matter too much, but keep it in your mind precisely. Okay, and then one more, sorry. Final for my days at the company. You have an idea, and most people from university focus on having a very good idea, the Google machine, the Google Road. And at this point, they had a very good search engine, and they almost went bankrupt. had they not also done a business invention of selling ads. Yeah, so, and Amazon, everybody who lived in 1996 could have invented Amazon. And Amazon would have gone bankrupt here if their fifth acquisition was not a search engine, the most modern search engine, they had bought for 100 million. So don't be satisfied with having a good AI idea. It's not good enough. You also have to have a very good business idea in order to survive at all. Okay? I couldn't say it more clearly, I believe. Thank you.
All right. Yeah, so I'm going to give a very short introduction about how I build a commercial open source. COSS stands for Commercial Open Source Software Company in Berlin, in Germany. So my background is completely different as the previous two speakers. So I'm just a founder like you, like many of you, like who are attending the summer school. So a quick intro about our company. We founded in pretty just 2 years ago, like in 2020 during pandemic in February. And right now we are growing to 50 employees all over the world. Our headquarters is based in Berlin, and we have people from work in China, people work in San Jose in Bay Area. And we have raised $38 million US since that, right? So we are also ranked on the top, like a CB Insights, very privileged AI ranking, like all, not only startup, all the AI companies. So we continuously, 2 years in a row in CB Insights AI 100. And we are also one of the Forbes DACH area, top 30 AI. And our investors spread over from China, US, GGV Capital is of course very big US investor firm. Canaan also from US. Sapphire, SAP has a deep relation with Germany, right? And Mongo is also from Bay Area. And Yunqi Capital is from China. So it's very diverse investor background, right? So what do we do here? At Jina AI, we build AI infrastructure for software companies that provide we are like a AI infrastructure software company to provide open source and enterprise solution for cross-model and multi-model applications on the cloud, right? So I want to spend just a few minutes to explain what is cross-model and multi-model, right? So there's some layout issues on these slides, but I think it should be fine. Right? So for example, if you Google a Mona Lisa fine art, and this probably is the results that you get, right? And you can also, so let's say if your input is a text, right? So this would be the output would be 4 images that Google finds you on internet, right? But you can also formulate this task in another form. You can also say, so instead of search, please create, right? So you can input as an oil painting of the Mona Lisa in the style of Van Gogh, right? Of course, this painting doesn't exist, right? It's just a create from AI, right? You can also switch the role between the image and text. You can also say the input is the image, and then you want to look for the output for the text, right? So then this task is called image captioning, right? So you give an image and try to find out what is the proper text description of this image, right? Or you can also formulate the task in another way, saying that I give you the image, I want you to find similar images, right? So basically, as I showed, there's 4 different tasks. You can kind of get the idea. I just play like word games by playing, image on the one side, on the left-hand side, and then the text to the right-hand side, and I switch the position, right? So in general, so what our company is about is trying to leverage the relationship between different modalities, right? Modality means data type. And then we use this data type as kind of DNA to either power search or power creation, right? It's very abstract, but let me give you an example, right? So let's say you are you want to somehow find out what is the related species of human, right? So is it ape or dog or cat, right? So you want to find out this relationship. You want to sort all the DNA, right? So one way is that you go to the zoo, right? You go to the zoo and then take an animal, right? Take a monkey. and then somehow like grab a DNA of the monkey, and then you bring back to the laboratory lab, and then sort all the DNA, right? The monkey, you get all the animals' DNA, and then you sort them, and then you found out, oh, human is more related to ape than dog, right? On the other hand, if you already have the DNA, then you don't bother yourself go to the zoo, right? In the first place, you already have all the DNA. So before seeing the monkey, you already know how this monkey is generated, because all the information is already encoded in this DNA. So we all have seen watched the movie that, there's some sci-fi movie that one day human goes extinct, and the last hope of human just send our DNA into a small box and then place on the spaceship and hope that one day that alien species could pick up this DNA and rebuild humanity, right? So why can't they rebuild everything? Because all the information is encoded in this DNA, right? So that's kind of the analogy of the DNA of the data, right? So once you have this relationship between the different data type, you can either use it to search or you can use it to create, right? But how to do that is not very obvious. And also, like, we want to provide a framework, a kind of AI infrastructure that allows developers and business to do that very easily. So this is what Gina AI is doing. So the second question I want to answer is, what is open source? But this is super simple question, because every software has a source code. If you open it to the public, then it is open source, right? So, so therefore, the more like a proper like a question would be, what is commercial open source, right? Because the idea is that if you already open source, if you already announce your source code to the public, then how do you make money, right? So imagine, let's make another analogy, right? So imagine you own a restaurant, which is super good at, cooking roast duck, right? And because it is a secret recipe, right? So you get it from your grandpa, right? And since 19th centuries, right? And then it is only available in your restaurants. So people come to you, right, to eat this roast duck. There is no surprise because, in whole Austria or in whole Europe, you are the one who sells this roast duck, and there's nobody else can get your recipe, right? But imagine one day you have like a few years later, you have a grandson, which is super like crazy, and he decided to open source the recipe, right? So he decided to say, okay, so this is a recipe, like import duck, doing some massage on the duck, and then doing some seasoning, herb, pepper, chili, all these kind of things. And you will feel very disappointed, because how can you make money, right? If you open this to everybody, then everybody can copy your roast duck, and then nobody will come to your restaurant, right? So this is some business logic behind commercial open source software companies that one must understand. But this is nothing new. If you look at all the companies that today, right, a lot of them are open source compared to like 20 years ago, Microsoft, Oracle, SAP, Adobe, Salesforce. Those are not open source companies. But if you compare to the companies that emerges in the last 10 years, more and more open source infrastructure company emerges, right? So there is a business logic behind that. So the question is, why would ever people do open source? And if the source code is not your moat, then what is the moat of your business? What is your business value? And finally, what is the business model of the open source company? Those are very big questions, but I summarize very quickly here. So why would you do open source? Because of the velocity, because it gives you the velocity to develop a software in faster speed, right? And if the source code is not your moat, then what is? Actually, the cloud service is your value adding part. You make money from the cloud serving, not from the source code. And finally, the business model is called open core. Again, I like to make analogy, so I will give you another analogy. So imagine you live in a Hilton hotel, right? So you have a very nice lobby that everybody can sit in. You don't have to pay money, right? You can go there and then pretending you are the kind of the guest from this hotel, and then you can sit there having tea. Right? Nobody will charge you, right? But why people build this very luxury lobby for you for free, right? Because they want to lure you in, and then you want to spend a night in Hilton Hotel, right, to enjoy all the service, and then you will have to pay, right? The more you pay Hilton hotels, the more luxury like a room that you can get, right? So you can get to the executive lounge, all this kind of value adding things. So when we build a commercial open source software company, it is like that. You're trying to provide open source software. It's like the free lobby. You want to make it pretty. You want to lure people in, lure your customer in. And once they are on board, you can sell them the value adding service on top, right? So in terms of our company, we also have this kind of business model. It's called open core business model. So if you think about a pizza, then it's basically divides a pizza into two parts. So one is a central part is open source, so the public is for free, and then the rest of the ring part is for monetizing, right? So based on this business model, so this open core business model, you can derive into two different extreme. One is a SIM model, which basically you try to do everything for free, and then in the end you can only sell t-shirt and souvenirs to make money, which is of course not sustainable for AI startup, right? So you need to pay salaries, right? By selling t-shirt and all these toys won't be very sustainable. The other way is to go the other rounds, and go other ways, and you become very sick model, right? So you convert yourself into traditional SaaS business, right? So the business logic here is, I just put the slides here, but it's, usually it's 3-3-3, this model. And so the first is developing products, and then developing community, and finally go to commercialization and IPO, right? So as the last two slides, I want to show you, some of the questions that also serve as a conversation starter for our panel session is why would I build such startup in Europe, right? So first, there are a couple of reasons, right? So first, I spent in Germany for many years. So personal background, I have a lot of relationship in the AI network in Germany, and also like a tech culture fitness. We found out there open source is kind of a tradition in Europe. So therefore, you can have a very big talent pool. And also, being in Europe means that you are being international competitive from day one. So thanks to EU. And finally, which is also very important, it's a free, open, and fair market. If you are doing business, this is super, super important. You don't feel it because it's like air, right? It's like air and water. You never saw that, oh, that's important to survive. You always saw that, I have to eat good food. But air and water is kind of the environment to make you survive. It's very basic, right? But I'm not trying to flatter Europe. Right? I also list some reasons that you don't want to build your business in Europe. One of the most the crucial reason is that the lack of successful exit and role models. This is super, super crucial, because if you ask your friends, ask your colleague, oh, should I go to a startup? Most people's reaction would be, yeah, that's too risky. Yeah, I don't have any people who go to startup and make a lot of money and retired when he was 30, right? If you don't have these examples, right, then you are kind of risk averse. You don't want to join startup. You want to join big companies, and you don't have these role models. Nobody will chit chat with you about entrepreneurship. Everybody just colleagues, employees. Nobody will speak like a boss. Will teach you about how to be a good boss, right? So this is something very important, but it's completely missing in Europe, right? And also, the other thing is a conservative and a short side VCs also always gives you a very low price. When you try to bargain the deals, the team term sheet, and finally the vibe is too peaceful, right? Sometimes it's too peaceful. A lot of people don't understand why I choose to build my startup in Berlin, not in Munich. Right, because Berlin gives a very disruptive environment, right? A lot of people hate Berlin because they're dirty, it's noisy, people are rude, but that's kind of the environment that you need, right? You don't need a very peaceful environment like here, right? So you want to be competitive, you want to be, kill your competitor, right? So that's very natural, right? So for example, look at this TechCrunch. This is a very famous, tech community or media in US. Their events is called Disrupt, right? It's not called Peace, right? It's called Disrupt. And there's a startup battlefield. Everything, about startup is about fight, about survive. It's not about living peacefully and try to, make up something. Right? So I think this part is very important, and which is, kind of missing in Europe. Right? Okay, that's my talk. Thanks.
Thanks, Han. Okay, I'm going to invite our panelists up on stage now so we can get into the discussion. Please come up. That was already a lot of content. I appreciate that it was a bit of a whirlwind tour there. This is being recorded, so all those slides will be on YouTube for anyone, for whatever reason, that wants to catch up. Thank you very much. Okay, we've got 2 mics. That's there will be a Q&A at the end, and that will also be recorded on the internet, just to warn you in advance. Okay. That's much better, actually, seeing everyone. So thanks for the introductions. Let's start with this question. We've taken it for granted that Europe is maybe a little bit too behind, or to use Han's vocabulary, maybe a bit too peaceful to its big completing blocks. Is Europe really that far behind? Arnold's nodding vigorously, so I'm going to give him the mic.
Yes. What worries me most is that the public-private investment in the US is tenfold to Europe. It's documented. In China, it's 6-fold to Europe. If you discount the wages there, it's also tenfold. So Europe is really leaving behind. It's not behind in science. There are equally many 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 for all. It's not behind in patents anymore. Neither is it advanced. It's also 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 approximately. And if someone is leading, then it's China. It's about starting a business. So you are in a very comfortable position because you have relatively little competition. So make the best out of it because you're the only ones.
And how do we catch up?
Well, of course, you're absolutely right. We are far behind, but I've been doing this for a while. So we were much further behind 10 years ago. So the way I tell the story is, if Silicon Valley is there, Britain is here, Europe is here, and Austria is there, that gradient was very steep not too long ago. The order is still the same, but the gradient has become a lot shallower. So one sign, for example, is for the first time in history, European venture capital gives better returns than American venture capital. And one of the aspects of capitalist society is that the money flows where the returns are. So, of course, you were absolutely right. We are far behind. We are a quarter of the venture capital per GDP in Europe compared to the US. But things are getting relatively better. So I wouldn't lose hope completely. However, I do agree with your last slide. This is still a big problem in Europe. One interesting detail that you might not be aware of is not only are we not behind in science, as you rightly said, but we're also not behind in startups. Europe actually produces more startups than the US. We do not have a startup problem. We have a scale-up problem. So that's one of the reasons why I'm so keen on the EIC, which I helped write the rules for, which is 10 billion for only deep tech companies in Europe.
So the nascent, or the sort of sparks of hope are lots of startups, increasing amounts of funding, a closing of the gap, and then the piece that seems to come up more often than not of where Europe really is world leading is around regulation and having a stable business environment. Natasha, do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Thank you. Yes, really, indeed, Chris. What I really admire about the European community generally is this willingness of scientists to engage with the policymakers, and really that genuinely across the sector. So I can't speak at the national, international level. I just want to speak at the community of us who are innovating from research, scientific perspective, and also getting into ventures to bring good to the society. I think this is really where we have integrity and we have willingness to do things for good. So I'm not so worried about whether it's TikTok here and TikTok there. I'm really worried about how we're going to get this technology in the right hands, good people who can bring true value through the technology that we designed.
I'm actually curious what the audience's view might be. So let's do a quick show of hands. Who actually does think Europe is behind in technology relative to the US and China? Because we take that for granted a lot. That looks like a majority. Put your hand up if you actually don't buy into that premise. Okay, so we need to differentiate between the commercialization and fundamental research. Okay, very good. So let's focus on that scale-up problem. What is actually needed to cross that scale-up gap and to really commercialize all of these increasingly well-funded and large amounts of startups operating in a very stable regulatory environment? Or to put the question directly to Han, what would it take for your company to become the next Amazon level type company beyond the monopoly board that Arnold presented?
Thanks. I think this is definitely like a challenge to all the startup founder is like you always try to you always have to scale up your company as fast as your competitor or even faster than your competitor, right? And so what we usually worry about is when we look at our competitor, we don't worry about like Google or Facebook. I don't think that's a realistic competitor. So if Google want to go into our field, right, so they just kill the whole industry, right? So it's not personal, right? So they will say, oh, it's not personal. I just want this industry. So therefore, I always try to compare ourselves with rivals from China, from US, who is doing more or less the same field, but like they are already at Series B or Series C, which is more well-funded than us and has more people, like the team is bigger. And then I compare to them, I think about the strategy, what do we have here, what my company has, they don't, right? So when I compare to them, I found that being a European company is actually creates a lot of there are certain advantages, right? For example, the community, right? The community, the developer community, the tech community of Europe is quite big, to be honest. Like yes, it's quite big. Many of you may feel like, oh, US has so many populations and they must have a big tech community there, right? But actually, Europe is not so bad. Like on this perspective, it's actually bigger and more mature than in China. So that's why when I set up this business, I first choose to Europe and develop the European technical developer community instead of developing the Chinese developer community first, right? Because it's the ground, this foundation is much better and it's easy to grow, right? And I think that's the one thing that you can leverage, right? Yeah.
But then, does this one work? Yeah. But then why have American and Chinese companies succeeded in completely overtaking European companies today in the tech field? To anyone, not necessarily to Han.
Yeah, I think one thing is a capital, right? And also like the other thing is a consumer market, right? Compared to if you compare Europe as to China and to US, one big difference is that Europe doesn't have a single language, single cultural market, consumer market. So you have very fragmented consumer market, and then each country has its own culture. And although you have a European Union value, but this doesn't mean applies to consumer market. Let's say you are building a food delivery like app, right? So you have to build your pay strategy, paywall like in different countries in different ways, right? So this thing doesn't happen in China, right? And also doesn't happen in US. In China, in the US, if you want to build a consumer-facing startup, you already have a big market, and then this big market allows you to do try and error, right? You can do A/B test, right? So you can design your strategy and divide the consumer into plan A and plan B and test different strategies and see how effective it is. But in Europe, in Germany, if you do A/B test, I mean Germany is relatively big, like has a big population. But in Europe, if you do A/B test, sometimes you don't have significant data to support your conclusion, right? And this is super important because if you want to, I briefly go over all the startup introduction in the brochure, and I found that most of you are not working on consumer market, so that's probably a good sign because it is the consumer market in Europe is so small that probably it doesn't support you for your unicorn dream, right? So that's my idea.
Okay, so consumers out. Where are the big opportunities for European startups and the people in the room to take advantage, if it's not the consumer internet? Natasha, when we spoke earlier, we spoke a lot about regulated industries. Would you like to give us some color?
Yeah, again, I like to take this because I really like to focus on meaningful applications, and I have seen a lot of among the participants of this event, lots of people really want to get into solving problems that are very difficult, and AI gives you that opportunity to go in and see how you can leverage, the data that you've got and precisely carve it for the technologies that or sector that you want. My experience has been, say, in pharma sector. Somebody can say this is extremely conservative sector, so they're not rushing to adopt stuff. And it's a good reason. I don't blame them, because in fact, if I can't reproduce results of my machine learning AI algorithm, and that may affect the patient, I'm prepared to spend the next 10 years to make sure that the quality assurance is in place. So I just want to say, there are certain things that are missing. They're not relevant in many scenarios. I can create another Mona Lisa image or whatever, Van Gogh style, because it doesn't matter. But where things do matter, then we really need more research on quality assurance and quality control. AI at the moment is like explosive. You can control explosive, or you can just have it burst. We know how to create AI models. We know how to apply them in certain situations, but most of the time it's a black box. We need to learn a lot more before we can control what it does and control how we want it to behave. So I actually believe that there is a lot of quality in Europe. We have really good scientists and researchers, and they will be asking the right questions and bring the right solution to the market in the places where it matters.
Maybe keep the mic, Arnold, because I'm going to direct the next question to you.
Okay.
But if we think about this problem of AI, there's really two things: the algorithm and the data set that you apply it on.
Yep.
And given that the consumer internet has been a sort of winner-takes-all environment, monopolies, if you like, all of these big data sets are outside of the European sphere of control. How do we remedy that?
Well, that must be very well taken care of, and very soon. The fact that, for instance, you could wonder whether it was, if I were a regulator, I would still leave Facebook for free, because you have to really take into account. I've pled for calculating VAT on the data everybody takes, because it's a real value which is going over across the cables to the ocean. So it really should be balanced in its, especially when you take it from consumers. What I really can't stand is that that all the business strategic information crosses the ocean without anybody seeming to care. And that should, you should really stand up. And if you really want to scale, not only the money is important, but also a strategy where you are forming a platform which makes other people, and you pass away it for free. You pass it away, as you said, for free, because you have a purpose with the free. You have a purpose of improving the whole sector, after which people come to you, rather than you have to conquer them. So that's the real strategy for me. Scale up is not only VC money, scale up is also a good enough business strategy to invite everybody in, so that you, the owner, will get the profit of the development, the profit of the strategy, the usual tactics as we see now.
Okay, so to summarize, because we're covering a lot of ground quite quickly, there's a lot of human capital in Europe, and there's no inability to apply algorithmic models to data sets.
Correct.
What's lacking is a bit access to these big consumer data sets, but in more regulated industries or where open source is involved, you can get data sets, right? The final component, I think, is hardware. You have to run these models on computers.
Can I make one more comparison before we move into hardware, because it's an important topic? You know the difference between a Dutch basketball team and a professional basketball team. As soon as you have the ball yourself, as soon as the Dutch people do very little. They look around, and in the National Basketball League in the US, as soon as I have the ball, all my teammates starts to run. That's the difference. That's the really cultural difference. As soon as you have the ball, run, go for it, build your platform. That's basically what is culturally lacking most. Yeah.
Okay, so there's business culture as well,
Yeah.
which I think is going up in leaps and bounds actually all across Europe. Okay, so we've got human talent, algorithms, data sets, and now hardware, because we need to run all of these models on actual bits of silicon, and that's all over the news at the moment. Well, it was one of your 5 pieces of key critical infrastructure on your slides, Herman: 5G, semiconductors, and so on. What's the European semiconductor environment like?
Well, we're clearly behind the US and now also China, but finally Europe is waking up, and we do have a CHIPS Act to bring back semiconductors to Europe. We used to have a 20% market share, a worldwide market share in semiconductors. We're now down to, I think, below 10%. But we're going to spend 145 billion euros to bring the semiconductor industry back to Europe. We're doing this by increasing our own productivity, our own production capability with Infineon, with ST Micro, with NXP, but we're also doing very substantial deals with Intel, who are building a 20 billion euro fab in Magdeburg. And in my opinion, Intel actually is the wrong partner. What we should really partner with is TSMC and Samsung, because they're the only 2 semiconductor companies in the world that can do 5 nanometer and below chips. So if you really want to be state of the art, these are the only 2 companies that can do it. And at least there is now a European. The good news, apart from having good universities and a good startup scene, is that we're rich. You know, Europe is a very rich area, so we've got the money. We can afford it. We don't have a money problem, we have an asset allocation problem. The biggest problem in Europe is that Europe's biggest risk is not taking enough risks. We just do not have that culture of putting enough money behind a good idea early enough so that it becomes a global winner. I want to make one more point on the consumer situation, which is clearly dominated by the US and with TikTok also by China. People, governments just have to have the will and the and accept the fact that they've got to break up monopolies. There are a number of monopolies at the moment that are clearly harming the world, and these monopolies need to be broken up. It is very unpopular to say, but in my opinion, Google, Apple, Amazon, Facebook, they all ought to be broken up. They all have market shares that are far too high for any Herfindahl-Hirschfeld index that gives you a measure of the diversity in a particular sector. Standard Oil was broken up when they had a 29% market share. America has lost the ability to deal with its own monopolies. And if they don't do it, we ought to do it for them.
Can we do that?
Well, by at least not having it in Europe.
The answer by Amazon is that we are not a monopoly because we have only one model, sort of retail model, but they go sideways. They've acquired One Medical to buy the medicine, and they've also they bought Whole Foods, so they're covering all of it in the full breadth of what you need daily, so to say. But if you look at the point, you need to be a vertical monopoly in order to be antitrust law. But if you look at it from the point of view, if you rotate it, and Amazon you consider to be a data processing company, for which the retail is only a sort of gimmick, then it is a monopoly, because it gets the most of its profit out of Amazon Web Services. It gets the most out of it. Do you know how much they make out of advertising on Amazon? The figures were published only last year for the first time. 30 billion is the advertising on Amazon. The retail delivers you nothing, as anyone, as your retailer at the corner of your street can tell you. Retail is 2% margin. It's something else, right? And that's why I agree completely that one way or another, either by natural decline or by your work or by governmental law, the power of the monopolies should be restricted soon. And my secret is, you should strive to become one. Yeah, that's the very best.
If I can just quickly say, my feeling is that every one of you ought to try to become a monopoly, and the job of the government is to make sure that you don't.
But is the challenge not that we're talking about something fundamentally more complicated than pumping oil? You know, Natasha, you're talking about black boxes. The number of people who really understand how the latest machine learning algorithms work, and especially if you haven't seen the data sets they're trained on because they're in private hands, is it actually possible? Like, are we asking too much of our regulators? Do they even understand what they do? Do we understand what we're actually talking about here? Maybe I should ask for a show of hands. I wouldn't put my hand up. Does anyone want to put their hand up to say with confidence they really understand how, you know, it all works and would be able to decide what's a monopoly, what's not, where to draw the lines? I'm seeing lots of furious shaking heads. So
that's not a counter argument, only because politicians aren't stupid. You know? So only because politicians don't know what they're doing most of the time doesn't mean that we shouldn't help them do the right thing at the end. And I think there is in my opinion, there is no alternative to breaking up these monopolies, because they will just eat away on pretty much every single part of the economy. And you managed to give a very good example. What the heck is Amazon doing in the health industry? You know, they have every intention and likely capability of becoming the monopoly in the health industry now, just because they've got all the money in the world to buy up any of the health companies that they need to create a monopoly, and they've got the data set to do it with. So I think it is one of the fundamental questions of democracy going forward, that we make sure. I don't mind at all Amazon trying it. It's their duty to the shareholders to do the best that they can, but it is the duty of the government to make sure that they can't. And the American government at the moment, in my opinion, is not doing its job. One more point. There is hope, because we've got Lisa Khan heading up the FTC. So one of the reasons why America created these monopolies, because the FTC had a very simple rule of what is a monopoly and what isn't, to your point that the regulators don't understand what a monopoly is. Well, the FTC certainly didn't understand what a monopoly is, because the one criterion that they had is the monopoly doing monopoly pricing? Are they disadvantaging the consumer by abusing their monopoly and raising the prices? But here they have monopolies where the prices are going down. Well, this is wonderful. We ought to have more of it. That they screw everybody else in the process. You know, see Amazon, Google does it much more subtly than Amazon and say Facebook. With Lisa Khan, who actually became famous with the Harvard paper on analyzing how Facebook is actually bad for America. And although they're fooling you into giving you something for free when actually they don't, she is now in charge of the FTC, and she's preparing a case against Facebook as we speak. So there is hope.
But this highlights the nature of the matter. We're back to talking about American regulators who we don't really have any influence over. So going back to, that's the problem, right? So going back to our regulators, do they have what they need to be able to understand the problem in the first place? Are the definitions of monopoly fit for purpose? Like we're saying, a lot of the time, monopolies now result in better consumer pricing, which goes against the old definitions of monopoly. How do we set these new standards and norms? Natasha, you've been working with a lot of regulators. How does this happen?
Yeah, I can just comment on the most recent stuff that has been done with both EU government and the UK government, really concerned about how to prevent harm to people from AI, not on the business model, not on the size of the companies, but truly on the functionality of that would reach out. As you know, we computer scientists actually messed up because the first deployment of AI systems, like face recognition and so on, instead of going to proper testing before things hit the crowds, we didn't do well. So then you got a gender bias, you got racial biases, and that was a really opportunistic move by, say, Google to try to push APIs out for everybody to use without actually testing stuff. So now we are paying the price because now we lost the trust. We have lost the trust that we can create technology that doesn't harm people. So what the direction of the government is then, well, let's put some auditors in place. So we start auditing the technologies before they hit the market. Now, fortunately, they're talking to computer scientists, they put the papers out and we can respond. We can start to reason with them what the transparency may mean in a reasonable manner, what would the bias mean in a reasonable manner, because all these machine learning and AI systems are trained through data because we want them to specialize in certain things. Do you call it a bias or do you call it really a good model? So I just want to say there's lots of concepts there that are really hard to grasp by somebody who is not a technologist. So good thing is we have a dialogue, and at the moment both the UK government and European government seems to be quite aligned about what needs to be looked at. The only question is going to be, are they going to have auditors that are going to prevent innovation, or are going to be auditors who will be reasonable and then work with us so that we can still bring things to the market, not do harm, and make progress?
Go ahead.
Can I say so? Yeah. To some degree, European regulators start to be effective. As in, practically overnight, the Data Governance Act was accepted, and it will be passing into law. The Data Act will be passed into law. So it is still very much scattered, as you will agree. It's patchwork here and there, but you can see the updates already coming, and it will be a coherent. I like the approach of now not being too late, but just take the step you can in order to regulate this. What I really don't like, but so now let me. I want to stay positive in this regard, because the regulation, you see the knowledge growing in the parliament. You see they move actively, so it will come into force. And for instance, Facebook has launched, Google have the largest departments in Brussels to combat European law, like 5 million a year. But nevertheless, they couldn't stop this from happening. So it is really building up a counter force in practice. And that's the way it should go. What I would warn Europe to do is not only regulate, but also act positively. Because it's so, if your defense is in order for the personal and private data, also do something positive rather than only negative. Yeah? So regulation in the end is always negative. If nobody commits a foul during a soccer play, then basically the empire is useless, right? So the regulation is always a negative force. It stops the play. but you can use the opportunity because you know it's going to be there. I said to you, in 5 years, it's a real force in your company. Take all the time and all the opportunities you have to build very quick and fast until that time.
Han, I want to ask you, as someone who's building AI applications, who should be responsible for the end result? Is it the market norm set by the dominant companies? Is it the government of the environment you have your company based in? Is it the government of the area to which you sell? Should there be independent auditors like we have for accounts? Is it just up to the values set by the CEO of the company? It's a pretty complicated thing. How do you think it should look?
So as a startup founder, I would put like the clients, right? If the clients are complaining about my data, the misuse of my data, misuse of their data, then I will take it seriously more than like the government forced me to do, right?
But isn't the problem that you don't necessarily know how your data is being used? How would they know?
I mean, so usually like so this is a different question. Like for example, in our company, right? So everything is open source, so they can know how the data flows, where the data is being processed. But we also, like for example, we implement telemetry in our software. Telemetry means that you can track how the user behaves, but also provides a way that user can opt out. That means you don't track user data. So the telemetry is very kind of like a controversial, because most of the software company in US, they introduce telemetry in their software in order to improve their software, right? But telemetry can be also abused by analyze by tracking user IP and all these kind of things, and to analyze user behavior, right? So in this case, if the client complains about this, I would take it very seriously. Like we provide opt out. We only, for example, store your data for certain couple of days or certain couple of hours. I think this is more direct than compared to the the macro economy, all these kind of things, right?
So in a word, transparency, to know how your data is being used.
Yes.
Do you think that would apply well to consumer applications as well?
Yeah, I think this right now, if you look at like especially in Europe, if you this GDPR, this Data Act, actually force a lot of company to pop up all this kind of cookies dialogue. So right now, if you open a web page, right, so the first 5 seconds is just click all the I accept or consent this dialogue, right? Click all the buttons to accept all the user agreement. I think this is already very obvious for most of the consumer apps, and also now it comes to, like, for example, if you are building a business that serves another business, then this is even more important thing for you, because business usually want to control their data in their own loop. So instead of hosting their data on your side, they prefer to close the loop. They prefer the data computation, everything happens in their own cloud or cluster. So in this case, it not only affects how you, the selling strategy or the complaints on legal things. Sometimes it even affects your business model, right? So for example, previously you design some subscription model which is perfect for people click the button on consent, and then you have their own all the competition data storage on your hand. But let's say you go to European market and none of the European business likes this way, right? They all want to have kind of self-hosted kind of model. That means competition storage must happen inside their company, not your company, right? In this case, all your subscription business model is just ruined. You have to start over. You have to think about how the product is going to be redesigned to make it self-hostable, right? So this is so the data problem is not only about like a legal or transparency or ethic, this kind of things. For startups, it's even related to your product, from the very first product design to business design to business models, right?
Han, I would just like to say that to me this looks like a self-correction, because what happened in the United States is a Wild West. They just grab our data and they went as far as they could. So the answer to the question of who should be regulated, I do feel that ideally, maybe utopia, but it should be self-regulating. And I actually have a great belief, and I'm so thrilled that new generations are more responsible. They do care about Earth. They do care about climate. They will care about the privacy. They will care about the future of their children. So I have a faith that this kind of self-regulation will come in because of the values that we have in Europe. It's deep values. These are democratic values. We have ethics centuries ago. I was working at University of Nottingham as a chair of data science. They gave me to teach ethics for 5 years. I was teaching ethics course to the third-year students, computer science. Do you know what told me? They said, Natasha, I wished I had this course the first year. I sinned so much. What did they do? They took the data. Ethics, professional ethics for computer science very clearly says you should not do anything to jeopardize privacy of the people who are serving. So you can read ACM guidelines. So all of these companies, they're all in computers, they're all engineers, computer scientists. You cannot legally chase them, but you can call them unethical. And they are unethical because they did not abide by the professional guidance. It is professional code of conduct for computer scientists.
Okay, we're getting optimistic again. That's good. We're about halfway through, so I'm going to do a quick summary on what we think as a panel it would take for Europe to reach European tech sovereignty. The talent. We have good universities, good research, not the main problem. Funding. Money is coming, and success breeds success. We have European tech successes now. The money will come. It's also creating a quite positive business culture, increasing numbers of startups. Access to data sets, sometimes that's sort of mixed bag depending on the industry you're looking at. Then there's the legal framework, which I think we more or less agree that Europe does function as the regulator of default for the world, and it does take into account ethics and values, perhaps a bit more than other places. That does force me to come back to hardware, though. And that obviously means I have to look at you, Herman, first. The very famous trend that's been driving hardware for a very long time is Moore's law, the doubling of capacity every 2 years. Are we reaching the limits of that? And if so, or if not, is hardware really going to matter? I feel like everyone in this room, when discussing these topics, has more or less always taken hardware for granted. Processing power will increase. Doesn't really matter what you put on top of it. Eventually, it will run. Is that going to stop?
Moore's law has stopped already. So there are two aspects of Moore's law. One is the speed of the processor, because the performance of a computer, of course, is linearly related to the speed of the processor. The speed of the processor has stopped increasing about 5 years ago. We're at about 5 gigahertz, and you can't go any further. There's a very simple reason for that. These chips, these microprocessor chips, are about 1 inch square. Light travels a nanosecond a foot. So about this far in a foot, which is 1 gigahertz. So at 5 gigahertz, it's a fifth of that. It's this far. The speed of light is only about 50% of the speed of light in vacuum is twice the speed of light on a chip. So it's this big. So if you want to clock a chip, you just cannot clock it faster than 5 gigahertz and still have it all synchronous on a chip. So in terms of the speed, Moore's law has stopped. In terms of the number of components that we can put on a chip, we're still doing all right. So we go from 5 nanometers to 4 nanometers, 3 nanometers. People even talk about 2 nanometers, which, by the way, has nothing to do with 2 nanometers anymore, sadly. But the reason why they still call it 2 nanometers is that if we were to use the old design rules of the old transistors, then we would be down at 2 nanometers if we use the old design rules. Nobody can produce transistors at 2 nanometers, but we have equivalent transistors which go into the third dimensions, these wraparound gates, etc., that give you the equivalent thing. So we've got this misnomer of 2 nanoseconds, which in a way is helpful because it It just is an extrapolation of what we've done before. So that continues for a little longer. But the excitement I have about the present hardware environment is that the first time in a very long time, we've got completely new computer architectures appearing that we've been dreaming of in the past, but that didn't exist. And that's quantum computing, which gives us an exponential increase with the number of qubits rather than a linear increase with the number of bits, and neuromorphic computing, because there's a very simple way of thinking about the performance of a computer. The performance of a computer is the speed of a single computational unit times the number of units that you can use in parallel, that you can use at the same time. And this is a vexing problem of computer science that has been around for a very long time. There is no generic way of parallelizing software. It is very, very difficult to keep lots and lots of processes busy at the same time. However, parts of machine learning and AI in particular, and in particular NP-complete problems like 3SAT, lend themselves to be parallelized. So there is an extreme case of that, which I'm delighted to look at the moment, which is a DNA computer. At the moment, the most powerful computer in the world is called Fugato, and it's Fujitsu's computer using 65,000 ARMs. So there's 10 to the 5 processors working in parallel. This DNA computer that we're looking at the moment is 10 to the 19 little DNA strands that all work in parallel. So although they're much slower, of course, there are so many more of them that you can still solve problems, NP-complete problems like 3SAT, that no classical computer can serve. So to sum up, now is a time that I haven't seen in decades of completely new computer architectures, which we didn't entertain even 5 years ago.
And I guess the reason that's relevant is because the complexity of AI problems that we're faced with is increasing exponentially. So the classic story that I think, or the end applications we like to give as examples, are starting with text. GPT-3, you can generate text from a large enough sample. It's pretty good. Now with DALL-E, we've got images. You can have the examples based on keywords that Han showed on his slides. And we're moving to a world now where we want to be looking at doing the same thing with video. Do we need to go to a new hardware architecture to make that jump?
GTP3 has been surprisingly successful. It was really the ImageNet was the supervised learning example that, made us all realize that AI is for real, and it finally worked, that you could recognize a cat in the car and different things. GTP3 and BERT showed us that unsupervised learning can yield fantastic results with more and more parameters. I think we're almost 10 trillion or getting up to 1 trillion. However, if you look at the really interesting problems in the world, they are NP hard, and we still do not have good computer architectures to deal with NP hard problems. And that's why it's so exciting to look at 3SAT problems, because if you can solve one NP complete problem, you've solved all NP hard problems at the same time, because there's a known mapping between any NP hard problem to an NP complete problem. That's the definition of NP complete, and 3SAT is one of those problems. And this surprising DNA computer that I'm looking at potentially has the performance to solve NP-complete problems, which would open up a completely new realm of solutions for problems that are not accessible to classical computers. There's a very exciting time.
I've asked someone who's famous, world famous in the Netherlands on quantum computing, what is the class of problems solve? And he said, well, that's a very interesting question. And every year I see him, I ask the same question, and there's no real answer. So I agree with you that for homogeneous problems, like how molecules fold, which are governed by a few very clear principles, and then you have to do an enormous amount of computation, that quantum computing may solve that. But I can't see, but maybe I'm too old for that, how it would affect tonight in the sense of how it describes the state of the art in AI. Because in AI, there are essentially non-linearities, which I can't see that a quantum computer can get over it. And for instance, a large-scale model mingles language into what was reasonably uniform in the model, namely everywhere in the image you would process it the same. And now large-scale models say, no, you don't have to do that. You have to do this more like this and that more like that. So in other words, you're bringing in lingual instructions into how to process an image. I can't see how you would implement that in a quantum computer, but if you can educate me, I'm thrilled, actually.
Neither can I, but I know people who can. So one of the exciting stories that I hear, and I'm very happy to link you up with Wolfgang Lechner here in Innsbruck, for example, who is in a company called Parity QC, which has a way of mapping some of the main machine learning problems onto quantum computers. So there are no solutions yet. This is an early attempt, but at least there are a number of people, and he's not the only one. There are a number of people who believe that there is an efficient mapping of critical machine learning algorithms on quantum computers that would make it a lot more efficient on quantum computers than on classical computers. But because it's so early days, this is not proven. One more theoretical point to make to you about the classes of problems that quantum computers may be able to solve that classical computers do not solve. There is a complexity class called BQP for bounded quantum polynomial time, which is not proven, but is believed to be a bigger complexity class than non-deterministic Turing machines.
Complexity class is definitely the right word for that. I think it's going over a lot of our heads, mine includes. So to bring it back to tech sovereignty, if quantum is the next big thing, and we've been hearing quantum is the next big thing for quite a while, so that's what I'm going to say. If and the DNA computer sounds completely awesome, but doesn't exist. If these things do mature and come to fruition, do we have a sense of whether Europe might be well placed to get ahead in those areas relative to the other main blocks we're talking about, the US and China? Nodding. Okay. Should we leave it at nodding? Yeah. Okay. There's a but. Is it a good but?
Well, the but is that this guy I was referring to has a 10-year contract in Delft, the Netherlands, with Microsoft. So that's
Delft is a good example. Delft is one of our great quantum computing centers, and it's not the only one. We've got quite a few world-class quantum, and interestingly, Innsbruck is another one. Innsbruck has not one, but two world-class quantum computing centers, one theoretical one under Peter Zoller and one experimental one under Rainer Blatt. So, and there's one in Paris, there's one in Munich. So we're strong again on the R&D side, but the only companies that have raised more than 500 million are actually a British company that had to go to the US, which is PsiQuantum, and another American company called IonQ. They all have over 500 million in there. So that's back to the finding enough money for these things.
Okay, and so hardware, like software, is a kind of winner takes most environment. If you have the best thing, that you sort of double down on that and you grow exponentially. So the monopoly tendency is also apparent in hardware. There are very few companies that can produce cutting edge semiconductors or the equipment for them. The big examples being TSMC or for actual fabs, or ASML in the Netherlands for the equipment used to make it, and so on. They're basically the only two companies who can do the most cutting edge stuff. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because I think our final topic before we go to Q&A has to be politics, because it's so much in the news. And the big question is Chinese tech sovereignty. You've got this kind of arms race going on across the different blocks. It's becoming a very politicized topic. Do we think, and at the moment only Taiwan is capable of producing the latest generation of semiconductors, and Samsung in Korea. Two questions really. Can Europe get there by itself? And subsequently, can China get there by itself?
No, or at least not in any reasonably short, at least not in short enough a time. So that's why we have to work with TSMC and Samsung and make sure that we bring their factories here. And why, when they asked me my opinion about whether to work with Intel or with them, I told them that Intel unfortunately lost the plot, and they do not know how to make 5-nanometer chips, and we will need 5-nanometer chips. I found it really quite irritating that it took the German car industry, which really is our sort of most core technology in Europe, the thing that we traditionally excelled most. They have, at least not until recently, they didn't wake up to the fact that they need 5-nanometer chips. They thought they just need, good power chips or smaller microprocessors for IoT, etc. But the heart of a future car, especially a car that can drive autonomously, has to be a state-of-the-art chip, and therefore they need TSMC. Your question about whether China can do it without it is a very interesting question, because a result of Trump's very aggressive stance vis-a-vis China was that China now has the second time only that they have a national program for semiconductors. They're throwing so much money and so much talent into the semiconductor industry that they, I think, do have a chance to get there just by the sheer weight of money and people that they're throwing at it. And SMIC, which is the largest Chinese semiconductor company, now actually knows how to produce 7-nanometer chips. So they are actually not far off TSMC. And of course, what they have done very successfully, because Taiwan is just across the water from them, they have paid the top engineers in TSMC 4 times their salary to come to China. So they do actually have the talent. It's a real danger that a lot of the technology, of course, is leaking across the strait. Therefore, I think the right strategy with respect to China is not confrontation, but engagement, to actually work with them, because eventually they'll catch up with us. So we might as well do it together with them and make sure that some of their factories are also built and work together with us to build them in Europe and the US.
But it sounds like Europe is then faced with who it wants as strategic partner in terms of strategic technical autonomy. Because the answer to the question wasn't, well, Europe can do it by itself. So it's a question of working with either American or Asian companies.
Yes, and work with both of them. I mean, I'm not against the Intel thing. That's not a bad thing, but it's not enough. We also need 5 nanometers, and we need to work with TSMC and or Samsung at the same time, because the real solution, in my opinion, is actually the meshing of all these my talk on technology sovereignty is not to create Fortress Europe, but to make sure that we have relationships with both the US and China that are symmetric. It's the asymmetry of certain sectors that we have that creates the dependency, and that's what we have to avoid.
Makes sense. Anything else from the panel? Otherwise, I think we can open up to Q&A shortly.
Oh, okay. For me, the hardware is important, but not the only thing. The data is what you want to get hold of. And if I were to grow a company, as I am, then I would be worried most about getting enough data and forming a platform to invite in others, so that I would form my own tiny little monopoly. That is a very fast way to grow your company, in full respect of that we need in the far end. We need also more hardware. It's not the only thing. If you take out this dual responsibility of you, that we need hardware in the future in Europe, as well as to take care of our own data, then we've delivered a complete message as far as I'm concerned. Sorry.
So I like to complete it with another other layer, and that's software. Okay. So we have hardware, we have software, we have data. And I'm mentioning this because I lead Interact Digital, and we started Interact Digital exactly because the software becomes obsolete too fast. And for AI, it's absolutely critical that we can do reproducibility of AI, which means that we need to keep this environment, soft environments, stable. So you can go back 10 years or can go and reproduce results, because without reproducibility, you don't have a notion of quality. And without quality, you don't have quality control. So without, I would say, without a reproducible AI, there is no responsible AI. Yeah, so that's how I would just close this hardware, software, and data.
Okay. Any questions in the audience? Or
Probably need somebody with a microphone.
yeah, I think we're microphone limited, so I'm going to have to do it. So I'm going to give this to you. No, don't worry, I'll come to you.
Hi there. I'm just trying to square the circle here, where we're talking about sovereignty of technology within Europe, and we're talking about funding startups to get to such a big size, effectively, that we have some dominance globally in some technology sectors. But if we're also at the same time saying, well, they can't be global monopolies even if they come from Europe, what would stop such a company from jumping to the US and maybe IPOing over there? Is like, how is it regulation that has to be open to entrepreneurship that gets to a monopoly level within Europe, globalization, and then doesn't leave that to escape Europe? What's that interplay? It's a difficult thing to just understand here. Sorry, I hope my question makes sense. I don't know.
Well, a monopoly happens after a very long, a reasonably long time, and monopolies are huge. So monopolies are not our problem in Europe. European monopolies are not a problem in Europe at the moment. Our problem is to actually make these companies large enough. The thing that is actually working much better in Europe than the United States is the competition. Commissioner Vestager is a formidable woman, and she is actually taking on Facebook and Google. At the moment, the problem is not European monopolies. At the moment, the problem is American monopolies. And I think we have a working competition organization that can deal with it.
So if you live off capital, you may be better off in the US, unless you have a good idea. But if you live off data, then maybe you're better off in Europe for the longer term vision. Right.
Thank you all the panelists for the great insights. So my question is kind of related to the previous question, and it's more about how do we actually keep as there are more and more scientists, researchers, as well as money is in Europe, yet we keep seeing the trends of startups eventually wanting to move towards US. How do you ensure that startups actually or companies are actually staying in the Europe? And it feels like we're at a point where we need to take somewhat of drastic measures or measures to make sure that we are looking ahead rather than trying to stay on top of the competitions with regards to US or China. So is the answer with regards to move towards future technology like quantum computing, do more on that, or better algorithms of AI? What do you guys think?
I was going to point to Han because you previously worked in China for Tencent, and you've raised mostly from American investors, yet you're sat here in Europe, in Berlin. So has the gentleman's question, in your eyes, sort of already been solved, or is there, I mean, being facetious here, is there still a lot to be done?
Yeah, I think in general, in this globalized world, it's very hard to draw a boundary to say that your company is a US company or Chinese company or German company. Look at the investor space that I just showed. It is combination of Germany, US, and China, right? So fortunately, right now our company still holds the majority part of the company, right? So like the board, like our founders. But this is super important, right? So don't sell your company at very low price. Otherwise, you lose the control that no other investor will pick up as Series B or Series C. Right? But that's a different topic. And but in general, I would say is as a startup, you really don't worry too much about monopoly, right? You don't worry too much about the cheap European tech sovereignty, all these kind of things. You worry about survive. Right, you're worried about how do you survive under the competition with U.S. rivals and Chinese rivals, right? And how can you survive? Of course, you need talents. So where can you find the best talents? Right, this is one factor that you choose where do you want to base, right? So for example, if you look at Europe, right, so looks like in Germany, we can find a lot of talents, but then you also want to find a cheap city in Germany, not in Munich. So you go to Berlin, right? So this is just one logic that, that support your company grow. Another, besides the talents, you also need money to survive, right? So who can give you money? Right? If a German investor comes to you saying that, okay, I will give you $1 million US, but in exchange for 50% of your company, right? Then, in other US investors saying that, nah, we will just give you 1 million, but only asking for 10% because it's kind of very typical in US term sheet, right? Then you of course go to, sign the term sheet from US, right? So you are not stupid and you need money, right? So also the investor is also not stupid because if they ask you for 1 million and then exchange for 50%, then he knows that he basically owns your company, right? Nobody will pick up in the next round, right? And so these two factors actually are worries. Usually, you as a startup founder, this worries you have to worry this more, right, compared to other things. Right?
The one thing I will add, just whilst the mic is moving, is I think at the early stage, this problem has more or less been sorted. A lot of American investors are deploying in Europe, and the pandemic did a lot to sort of erode those physical barriers. At the earlier stage now, I'm pretty convinced there is a lot more money in Europe than there are ideas. At least that was the case at the sort of peak of the market. There's a bit of a slowdown now, I suspect temporary. I guess the real problem is when it comes to listing and the IPO market, and that's where the scale of the capital markets in the States really can't compete. It is quite fragmented in Europe, and that's maybe a topic for another panel discussion.
So where you're planning your IPO at the Vienna Stock Exchange?
Yeah, so Precisely. Yeah.
This was question to him.
Yes, yes. So, I mean, as if you ask a founder, what is your goal? Of course, the successful exit the company is the goal. If you ask a founder that doesn't give you this answer, I would say is it probably doesn't like think it through, right? So, in New York, right? Yes. Yes, because this is what I said in my slides, right? I think that the Europe lack of role model. You don't find role model. You don't find a path that you can follow. There's no one teach you, right? I mean, in Germany, like nobody grow as fast as we do. You know, as a startup, as Series A company, we raised 30 million US dollars. For Series A, which is like put our valuation on super high as a Series A company. But then, who should I learn? I need a role model. I need somebody to to discuss what's the next step. But since all your rivals in Germany and in Europe is like slower than you, of course you have to find more competitive, more stronger, more faster rivals. From US, from China, right? So if you put the scale of our company versus US company versus UI rivals, they are, you know, it kind of it's not big, right? The 30 million US dollar for Series A is not big, right? And there's a couple of people that you can follow. You can learn how to do the next step. I think this is why, you know, in order to reach IPO, you always have to, you know, like say makes your valuation reach on certain threshold, right? So I mean, Series A, Series B, Series C, and it's kind of like you try to jump on the stage one by one until you reach the threshold, and then you are ready for IPO. But this path is not obvious for a lot of European startups, right? You also don't learn that from university. I came from Technical University of Munich, which is also very good university. Like the university slogan is a university for entrepreneurship. But I didn't learn any entrepreneurship there. I just learned a bunch of engineering stuff, right? And so this is something that I found is also a lack, you know, missing part in the education. We are trained to be very good researchers and engineers. But in terms of the stock options, in terms of how the company runs, in terms of what is the path that sends you to IPO, there's no guidance on this. Yeah.
Yeah, first of all, thank you for the wonderful talk. You talk about European tech sovereignty. One of the key aspects for the sovereignty is innovation. And there's also a regulation aspect that you have spoken. But I, as someone who is doing research in computer science, sometimes I find that these regulations, for example, GDPR, that are acting as a barrier to the companies like who are key to innovation. So how should this be addressed from the regulation perspective in order to thrive the innovation?
Interesting. Don't ask the regulator, but act yourself. Ignore it for the next 2 years, and then, but keep it in mind for later. You cannot, that if you have good intentions, that at this stage that's good enough. Don't. I'm not recorded, so I deny everything later. If you have good intentions, that's good enough for this stage. You go ahead as fast as you can. You build competitive strength. You build a platform so that you can create whatever profits from you. The larger, the better. But keep in mind that that we are still in the intentional state of regulation. And before my honorable colleague speaks, let me remind you that plastic was only regulated for its adverse effects 100 years after it was created. And so there are, regulation in AI is incredibly early. And there are many other things which are being created now, like these minor unbreakable plastics, PFAS in the Netherlands. That's a problem these days. They are around on a large scale. So regulation is important, especially when it relates to our personal data, because the only thing you do with personal data is regulated, and to be fair about it. It's the essence of your life, so to say. But take my advice, yes. Take my advice, have good intentions, ignore it for now, but be prepared for later.
Yeah, I just like to give some examples. So for example, when I was teaching at university, every year we have 7 or 8 different kind of theses. So 4 of them will be undergraduate thesis, computer science, 3 masters, and then 1 PhD. They were all doing AI, machine learning. And of course, what do? You go online and you scrape the data. So at University of Nottingham, we had a ethics guidance, and then we would inspect any proposal. So if they wanted to do scraping of data, we would discuss that, whether this is within the ethical guidance. So it is possible sort of to give the freedom, but it's controlled freedom. At least the person needs to be aware that they're doing something that is not completely, white. It's a gray area. Most of the time we talk about the data that's acquired online. What we are violating basically is what we say secondary use. The data was published there for the purpose of communication. Computer scientists then do that, come in and then repurpose it. They do it because they want to predict the profile of a person, anticipate where the person is going to be next morning, and so on. That was not the intent of publishing the data. So therefore, we are violating what they call the initial intent. However, there are many, many algorithms before AI that were not dependent on data. So there's plenty to do. AI is just one type of algorithms. And even in AI, the algorithms are not dependent on data. You want to teach chess, computer how to play chess. This is a completely different class of AI stuff. So I just want to say we got so stuck on data because opportunistically we can get data and start modeling things, but optimization, fuzzy logic, programming, all sorts of other stuff, they have been done in many other different ways. And just maybe on a final note, people are becoming very much aware that the data is needed. So it just happened that I know a team that's working on synthetic data. So they have patient data, and they're creating synthetic data derived from the patient data, and they're sharing that. And the purpose of that is that at least you will know what NHS, for example, has about patients. At least you will know what questions to ask. So you can, even that, I would say, there is another way to support research at university that would prepare you for the first minimum value product later in life. But the principle can be done based on synthetic data or data that is done within bounds.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. So usually as a founder, you don't have to worry about this, because once you announce that you want to, add some data check, this kind of telemetry things, your colleagues will fight against you, right? It is already part of the culture in Europe, right? So let me take my company as example. So we have 50 people, 60% of them based in Europe, right? So you can consider them as European, right? And this telemetry feature, we take 1 year to roll it out. It's just unbelievable long. Why it is took so long? Because people are arguing this like forever, right? Sometimes I have to put them on mute, right? I have to stop the arguing, right? Because this is just it's already part of the culture, and the self-regulation, right? Kind of self-regulation, and so usually when you as a founder, of course, you want to build a company in Europe. And this is something that not only you have to be aware of, the self-regulation, but also like your colleagues, your employees. They all have this kind of culture deep in their mind. Right?
Okay, I think we're at time. Thank you all. We've covered an awful lot of ground. I will make a poor attempt at summarizing everything we've been through. But it sounds like there's a lot to be positive of for European tech sovereignty with regard to AI. There's the right people there, the right regulatory framework, the right intentions, the money is coming, There are notable hardware successes. And so really it's just on for everyone in the room to just sort of do it and become the next market leaders in their field. So that's it. Thank you all.